Hi, this is Fred Tangy, structural engineer for the Lake House, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California. And U.S. Modernist Radio was there again this year, interviewing nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers, plus extra special guest at the U.S. Modernist compound, poolside at the hip Hotel Skylark. We are so sad today. It is a day of mourning.
Oh my God. Is there any Kleenex in this room, Tom?
George, I think we have some over here. From our wonderful trip to 2020's Modernism Week, today marks our last two interviews. What an amazing run. 18 shows, over 50 brilliant, interesting interviews, and all the frittatas and bacon we can eat every morning. Our special closing guests are architect Takashi Yanai and car culture expert, author Gabrielle Esperdy. They spoke as part of the wildly popular lecture series at Modernism Week. And I know this is where I'm supposed to relate another story of what Modernism Week means to me, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank George for giving me the most interesting way to work from home this past summer. I've edited almost all of the interviews we've had here on U.S. Modernist Radio from the third floor of my townhome in North Raleigh, safe from viruses, while listening to some of the world's most interesting and articulate people get interviewed by Mr. Smart. It's been a real treat to help you make these series of shows over the last couple of months. I gotta tell you, it sure beat watching Tiger King.
Oh, yeah. What a road wreck there.
Yeah.
Tom has been our engineer and co-host now since the very beginning of this. It's always fun to bring him out to Palm Springs and sit him by the pool and feed him martinis and frittatas and watch him go putting all these together. If you're into mid-century modern too, Modernism Week is a great way to experience the martinis, art galleries, shopping, lectures, documentaries, parties, curated exhibits, and much more. And one of the highlights for me every year is just visiting the Palm Springs Art Museum, which is a fixture of town right downtown. They have free and paid exhibits, special exhibitions. There's usually something that is curated just for Modernism Week. And you can go through this amazing building, which is significant not just for the art, but also for the architecture. If you want to go with us in February 2021 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist compound, email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by nichiha.com/US Modernist and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In her continuing made-up life, Modernist realtor Angela Roll bought the duplex next to stately Wayne Manor in Gotham City. You may have never noticed it in the TV show. No one wanted to live next to the reclusive billionaire and his creepy butler Alfred and those loud, mysterious late-night noises from some souped-up car roaring down the road. Living on one side of the duplex and advertising for a tenant in the other, one day Angela's doorbell rang. It was the Penguin, he said.
What? Now look, Angela. The guy in that stately manor and his creepy butler are my arch enemies, and I need a cheap place close by to build an exploding shark. When can I move in? Walk.
With that, Angela became the Penguin's landlord, and recognizing her design skills, he hired her to do the build. It took a year because an exploding shark takes a lot longer than you think. You have to build a pool for it, you have to transport it, and you have to get your victim in the water. That's a real pain. As Angela designed the fins, built the shark cages, and installed the explosives, she realized the Penguin's evil plan had to be stopped. Of course, we all know what happened. The Penguin's shark finally deployed and, strangely, swam away from the Cape Crusader. With specialized design training, Angela Roll advises buyers and sellers of modernist houses on everything from appropriate renovation to secretly giving Alfred a can of shark repellent. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. By around 1950, the good old US of A was becoming the United States of the automobile, an auto-utopia in which the car and car travel was a dominant cultural force. Architectural and urban historian Gabrielle Esperdy edits the Society of Architectural Historians Archipedia, which is wonderful, it's online, and teaches at the New Jersey Institute of Technology Hillier College of Architecture and Design. Her latest book is American Utopia, helping readers discover US 1 and Route 66, Las Vegas and LA, Disneyland and the Southdale Center through heroic highways and drive-in monuments. Let's go now with my interview with Gabrielle in sunny Palm Springs.
Hi, Gabrielle. How you doing?
I'm fine. It's a beautiful day in Palm Springs.
It seemed that way most of this week, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I understand that we share 2 out of the 3 following items: a wife, a dog, and a Mini Cooper.
3 critically important things in my personal and professional life.
I do not have the dog, but I have the other 2.
Is your wife a blonde or a redhead?
She's blonde,
Okay,
yes.
yeah. So's mine.
What do you know? What are the odds of that? And a Mini Cooper? What's your Mini Cooper?
It is a 4-door hardtop, bright orange.
S?
Oh.
It is an S.
Mine is bright orange.
Yours is-
I'm
yeah,
not
I
making this
thought-
up.
And is
Yeah,
yours an
I've seen-
automatic or a standard?
It's an automatic 2-door S.
This is a 4-door standard transmission
You're a
because
shift woman.
automatic cars are for pussies.
Okay. And she's on record.
That's right. That's right. They're harder and harder to find
Yeah,
now.
no, I know. In fact, Mini Cooper stopped making this year, I think, for the 2020 models. They weren't doing a standard transmission that was being imported.
Really?
Yeah.
What they were doing on the back end? From
I think it was just
over
they
here?
just weren't selling them here.
Oh.
The official reason is that supposedly automatic transmissions have become so fuel efficient, there's no point anymore.
Except that, right, standard are fun. And I decided this is going to be, since our next car is going to be electric. Actually, I was hoping this car was going to be electric, but then our last Mini Cooper finally died after a decade.
Yeah.
Of-
And you know, the new Mini
I-
Cooper is out and it gets like 24 miles on its battery. It's some horrible number. You'd think that being run by BMW,
That they'd be there already.
yeah.
Right, and I guess electric cars don't have shifts.
But, right,
Yeah.
right.
They
All
just have
right.
buttons.
Yeah, they have buttons.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's more fun.
It is. That's, one last time.
My girlfriend has a shift Subaru.
Yeah. Well, and also I don't commute by car, so I can enjoy driving.
Yeah, when you go out someplace.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're here talking about Utopia and the car culture and all of that for Modernism Week.
I am indeed. My new book is called American Utopia, and it looks at the way that the automobile shaped architectural and urban discourse in the middle of the 20th century. And my cocktail party version of what the book is about is that it's an intellectual history of the roadside. So it's a history of ideas, looking specifically kind of through the lens of the forces that shape the built environment.
Okay, so this is AUTO.
The
Yeah,
automobile utopia.
Okay.
The United States of the automobile. And it's one of those things that I'm sure you well know, the evolution of the drive-in and motels and supermarkets, all of that in the past, say, 30 years has been really, really well documented. And we didn't need another book about that.
Right.
But I became really interested in tying all of these ideas together. Because when did architects start thinking about gas stations or not thinking about gas stations? And so all of these disparate little episodes ended up forming the kind of continuous narrative of the book. Another way of looking at it is we're all familiar with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown going
Right.
to Las Vegas quite
Sure.
famously. And I started thinking, well, obviously there were people thinking about the impact of the car on architecture and urban form before Bob and Denise started driving down Las Vegas Boulevard. So that was the other motivating factor. What else was going on? And what I discovered is that, and this is not to in any way diminish the achievements of learning from Las Vegas, but what I discovered is that, in fact, basically since the first Model Ts rolled off the assembly line, there had been a kind of continuous, we could call it an argument, about what the car was going to do to the built environment. And so that's what the book is about.
I'm sure that one of the people that will not be buying your book is Professor J.S. Curl,
Oh, yes.
who was on our show a couple of months ago. He is an avowed anti-modernist.
Ah, interesting.
And also
and
very
anti-
much against the car.
Yeah,
Because it has ruined all the Irish and English villages and the
All the
motorways.
motoring, I think,
the
was his
motorways.
problem.
Isn't it fascinating that it's always the car to blame rather than the people? I mean, this is the other thing that I find really fascinating about all of this hand-wringing about blaming things on the car. Now, I am as much as anyone, a firm believer that the proliferation of automobiles in urban places and in ex-urban places has had a profoundly negative impact on the environment. But the cars didn't do that by themselves.
Right.
They were driven there by people. Right.
And so I do think that it is important to frame the discussion in such a way that we understand that it's people making conscious choices about how we are going to live with or without the automobile.
But don't you know, Gabrielle, we people don't want to take responsibility for any of our choices. Come on.
It is very true. It is very, very true. Yeah, because it's a lot easier to blame it on the they, whoever the they are.
Yeah. I mean, responsibility, please.
Yes, like blame it on the big three. Blame it on General Motors.
Yeah.
Blame it on
It's
the
the
Eisenhower
Illuminati that are
Interstate.
doing it all, right? Yeah. From their secret cabal.
Yes, the deep state of the interstate, I suppose we could say.
That's good.
So it has been well documented things like the interstate system, which most people don't know was not pitched as a transportation project.
No, it was.
It was pitched as a wartime defense project to get all the heavy vehicles and tanks from one place to another. You know, in case you have to move your tanks from New Jersey to South Carolina over the weekend, which never happens.
Well, you know, it is interesting, though, because if one goes back to a lot of the original conversation around the sort of Eisenhower signing the interstate program into law in 56, it's true that it was the Defense Highway System Act, but the kind of rationale was that the United States had already, in effect, become so auto-dependent, largely because of all the federal highways that had been systematized beginning in the 20s. The country was so auto-dependent that it would have been an economic disaster had the federal government not invested in a system of modern highways. And so, you know, a lot of people, again, it goes back to that, blaming the interstate for sprawl. The argument was actually we're already there. We already live in kind of far-flung communities, and it is necessary for the economic infrastructure as much as physical infrastructure.
For the toilet paper and the chickens to get
from
Podunk.
farm to market, as it were.
Yeah.
I was 9 years old, and we took a trip from North Carolina all the way out to the west. This is 1963. And I have vivid memories of us getting stuck on 2-lane U.S. highways behind convoys.
Absolutely.
And they were these, 50, 100-unit trains of jeeps and, various military personnel. And so then it was always a game of chicken do you pass?
A convoy.
Yes.
And then there
Hang
was
on
that
just a second.
song. Yeah, they're bringing them in. Now we have airplanes to bring them in. But with interstates, it became much less of an issue. But there was a lot of that movement going on.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I think it was both troops, equipment, and then, as you said, goods, right? Moving goods from point A to point B, particularly at a time when, in terms of manufacturing, it was all still done here, right? So the vast majority of what made it to U.S. retail markets were things that had been produced in U.S. factories. And then, of course, as that changes, the ports become so much more important than they had been earlier.
Right.
But I think, it's funny, when we talk about the interstates now, it's comparable to the political discussions that we have about rebuilding the train infrastructure of the Northeast Corridor, right? And kind of talking about how important that is economically. The interstates were being put forth as something parallel to that.
We used to have a great train system in North Carolina, like most states. It's almost all gone now. We have one line between Raleigh and Charlotte that goes a couple times a day, and that's it. But back in the day, you could hop on a train, you could go down to the beach, you could go up to the mountains, all of that. They were very iconic things that sort of shifted as the transportation modes
Absolutely.
shifted. I wanted to ask you, in relation to cars, I know that a watershed moment for all automotive fans was the development of the Mustang, right, which was 60s. And that kind of heralded in this kind of new lifestyle of the late 60s and early 70s, and you were in this fast car with your shifters and things like that. For Palm Springs and Modernism and architecture, it was a different set of cars. What kind of cars would you have seen here during the time of this architecture boom?
That's a really good question. I would assume they would have been a variety of kind of elegant sedans and
Cadillacs, I would
probably
think.
some
A lot of
Lincolns.
Fins.
I would think so. Certainly, if you look at, say, some of the Julius Shulman photographs of the kind of iconic houses, you're really seeing those kinds of elongated Harley Earl bodies in the driveways of a lot of the houses here. It's interesting, though. I thought you were going to ask a different question about muscle cars and about cruising culture. And I think one of the things that emerged by the late 60s, particularly in folks like J.B. Jackson, who was a sort of geographer who became interested in what he called odology, which is the sort of the study of highways and roads. One of the things that Jackson observed, and he uses muscle cars as a way of getting at this, is that we had failed to realize that driving a car and like cruising was the equivalent of going to a town green. So if in the 19th century, our way of understanding community was about going to the town plaza, that Jackson makes this argument that cruising was the equivalent, and that we had to respect, if you will, the driver as, in effect, an authentic urban figure. And so that
Oh my God, does this mean now that social media is like going to the town green? Because
yeah.
I mean, again, if you
I guess so.
if you go back to the early days of the internet, right? I mean, the very notion of the well. Right, the well was meant to be a kind of community platform,
Like a bulletin board.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not far-fetched at all. And one could argue, right, is transportation is always the critical thing that changes our shared values and our ideas of community. So absolutely, whether it's social media or any other kind of platform. But
And cruising culture was born here in Southern California.
Absolutely, because the weather was so damn good.
That's true.
all the time.
Yeah, have the top down, find your friends.
And if you go back and look at some of the 60s TV shows, as soon as the LA reservoir systems got built to handle the floods, of course, these are miles-long concrete runways,
Yes,
basically.
right. So
They were
drag
filming
culture, yeah.
people drag racing
Yes.
through the LA
Yeah.
reservoirs. I remember, on the old series Dragnet with Jack Webb,
Yep.
he was always chasing some errant hippies, in their cars as they were racing through the reservoirs to close their drug deals. And he with his crew cut, he could throw them into
Yes.
jail. And then, ask some person, just the facts, ma'am. That was his line. But that was, all part of this thing. Whenever there was a technological shift in LA, there was some sort of car thing. going
Yeah,
back into it.
absolutely. Though, of course, it's critical to remember that Los Angeles, the kind of attenuated urbanism of Los Angeles, was actually predicated on the existence of the streetcars in the inner urbans.
Yeah.
Because that's what created the kind of networked infrastructure of the city now. And so when we think about the inevitability of the automobile and its connection to the growth of Los Angeles, we need to remember that it was built on this earlier model.
Now, you are also involved with something called the SAH Archipedia.
I am indeed. I am the founding editor of SAH Archipedia.
So that's another thing we have in common. That's a fourth item because I founded U.S. Modernist. And so we have some overlap. I love your site and see it all the time.
Thank you.
And it debuted when?
Well, our open access platform just debuted last year, which was a
Yeah.
complete redesign. And we've been around for about, I should have this immediately at my fingertips, 2010, I think we launched, with foundation content from the Buildings of the United States series, which is a award-winning book series published by the University of Virginia Press. And so we're at a really interesting moment now because for the past about 4 years, we've been developing new content that is born digital content. And again, it's the kind of thing that no one sort of outside publishing or the academy really cares about, but there has been a big perceptual difference about content that is born digital, i.e. scholarship that is made to live on a digital platform, and that exists in book
Other
form, in
forms.
printed form,
Right.
yeah. And so what we've been trying to do is, in a way, flatten that hierarchy and make an argument that, again, because we all know however much we rely on Wikipedia, and it has, of course, become much more reliable
Yes.
over the years.
'Cause there are people that live on Wikipedia.
Absolutely, and who are really quite committed editors, and who take the very premise of it quite seriously. That everything that's on there should be that you should be able to reference something else that is, let's say, authoritative or at least accurate.
Right.
But when we first conceived of this project, that didn't really exist, right? We all used Wikipedia as our example of everything that's wrong about what's on the
Yeah.
internet. Nonetheless, I still think that even in this era, there is need for thoughtful, interpretive content on the history of the built environment, which is what SH Archipedia attempts
He
to
really
provide.
does a good job at that. We're the Dragnet. We're just the facts ma'am on our site. And you bring the thoughtful, interpretive content to these buildings and
Well,
stories.
thank you. I'm delighted to hear that. And of course,
Like
that's
yin and yang.
yeah.
Wow.
There you go. They work together.
They do, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have magic rings we can cross and form some kind of superhero that has a giant Mini Cooper
And there you go.
and two blondes by
Right.
the side. Yeah, I love that picture. Okay,
George, you're not right.
I am not right, am I?
That's what we say in the
I
South.
prefer a stretch Escalade if we're really.
Okay.
We'll make a note of it.
Well,
Yes.
that's good, but that's because I teach in New Jersey. So.
Oh yeah, well there you go. Here in Palm Springs, car culture really got out of control in the 70s as people forgot about modernism. It was not cool anymore. There was not a whole lot going on. And then it became a real problem for the town with people cruising and racing. And this was a spring break destination.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And people were destroying the town. And I think it was either Sonny Bono or the mayor right before him figured out a way to reroute the highway. Did you know this story?
I don't know.
It's 111 here.
Right.
And I think originally it was either a state or a federal highway. And so the city couldn't control it.
Right.
And they made some deal with the state or federal, whichever it was, to swap roads. So that the road that they
right.
control went around
Right,
town.
right.
And the one that went through downtown when all the problem was under local jurisdiction.
Oh.
So they could control access, they could shut it down, they
Right.
could bring in the police whenever they wanted to, and that ultimately solved some of that.
And that's
problem.
actually I didn't know that about Palm Springs, but
Yeah.
that strategy was something that occurred in many, many places, particularly with the whole notion of a bypass, right? The bypasses that had
Yeah.
developed starting in the 20s. And a lot of times it really was swapping the designation of the highways
Yeah.
for precisely that level of
For
control.
a community that is on a highway, at first it's a blessing because it brings people to the town. But sooner or later, you want that traffic out of your town.
Absolutely. And again, of course, there's always that tension between the business owners and those who claim that the bypass is going to kill them, and then those who claim, no, there's a more delicate, it's like a tipping point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that always has a real impact on the fabric of a given place. What do you do with parking? Where do you put the people? I was fascinated that the parking is free in Palm Springs.
Yes.
At the Jersey Shore, paid parking, I mean, you pay to get on the beaches
Yes, you do, yeah.
in addition to paying for parking because that's the lifeblood of most of the communities.
It's a little more low-key here.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is nice. It's a little better vibe.
And the pedestrian crosswalks here really work.
Yeah.
You press a button and these lights flash, and
Yeah.
it's not a stoplight. It's just flashing lights, and people actually stop so
Yeah,
you can get
no.
across the street.
Right.
Yeah.
This is remarkably pedestrian friendly.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I've been, it's been about a decade since I've been here, actually. And I have been really impressed by that level of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because we spent 2 days just cruising around on our bicycles that we got from the hotel.
Yeah.
And it's just been amazing.
Now, were you staying in the Hyatt?
No, I'm staying at the V.
At the V, okay. I just discovered that the Hyatt downtown was originally designed by Pierre Cardin.
Pierre, was that around the same time Pierre Cardin was, doing like designing Cadillacs and stuff? I wonder.
Cars and furniture, and the hotel was
These
called.
are brand extensions?
Well, he was just into everything
Yeah,
at the time,
yeah.
and it was called Maxims, I believe.
Huh.
And then eventually that just didn't work, and then Hyatt came in and took it over. But this was, I believe, one of the first atrium hotels that was not a super tall
Right,
like you
right,
have
right,
in Atlanta.
right.
It was this kind of curated experience. It was supposed to have a lot of art in it and shaped around these interesting triangular atrium styles. And it's still very nice.
Yeah. Well, those kinds of projects, it's all about the maintenance, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you go into ones that have been sort of meticulously maintained since they were finished in the 70s, you still get that sense of, wow, of the power of the atrium was supposed to do. And then if you go to ones that haven't been, you're like, oh, these are horrible places. But look, it's like, I mean, that's the kind of changing attitudes towards modernism as well. If things were left to be run down, of course they were horrible.
Yeah, right.
Which didn't have anything to do with their original design necessarily.
There's a lot of that going on. We've done several shows about public housing projects that were designed by architects.
Yep.
And there's lots of blaming that goes on around public housing. But what often gets overlooked is that the U.S. government, while it provided funds to build these things, would never provide enough money to actually keep them up over time and left that to the localities, which could almost never do it.
Well, and that's true. And then in addition, the plans were usually never built out as originally intended. So
a lot of value engineering, they call it.
Absolutely. And even more than that, the social programming that was supposed to go with them
got thrown out.
Got completely thrown out.
Like Pruitt-Igoe?
Yeah.
Pruitt-Igoe is the classic example
in St. Louis.
of that.
But many, many other projects that were based off little Pruitt-Igoes around the country.
Oh, absolutely. In Newark, New Jersey, spent most of the 90s tearing down its high-rise housing projects.
Yeah.
Again, not because there was anything necessarily wrong with them in terms of their physical plan, but they had been really, really poorly maintained. And they had, of course, become sites of violence and drug trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if they had been maintained historically, I'm not saying they should have been preserved, but our ideas about the urban fabric and the interaction of housing and other spaces has changed. And I think that's another thing that contributes to why a lot of those projects got torn down.
So what's up next for the automotive field? I mean, what is car culture going to morph into next? Is it the self-driving thing?
It's sort of interesting. I mean, as an architectural and urban historian, I always have to take the kind of long view.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I am fascinated by now is that we seem to be entering a continued moment of automobile utopia, because in terms of self-driving cars, in terms of ride sharing, it's as if we still think that the car can solve all of these problems.
Yeah.
Whereas again, if you're looking at it from a historical perspective, I keep saying, wait, we've had these arguments before. It's not about the cars. It has to actually be about how we imagine interacting with urban and ex-urban locales. I think we're going to have a good 20 years of euphoria about the supposed value of autonomous vehicles and ride sharing. And then there will be the inevitable backlash. I mean, the inevitable backlash is already happening, because we know that ride sharing has in fact made many cities far more congested. So it's a really interesting moment. And I think that inevitably, well, I'll tell you, when I first started this book project, I had assumed that Utopia had ended. That was my premise, like back to the city, where, pedestrianization. And then I realized by the time I kind of finished writing the book that, oh, no, the same thing is happening all over again. And so if an earlier generation, it was the interstates that were going to save us, now we're in a generation of saying it's autonomous vehicles and ride sharing that's going to save us.
Yeah.
And again, architects and urban planners are drinking the Kool-Aid, as it were. I have a PhD student right now who's working on a project just kind of collecting all of these current future scenarios. So maybe when she's finished, I'll be able to answer that question more thoroughly.
Well, Gabrielle, it's delightful to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to putting together our Power Rings
Absolutely.
to form a giant...
Absolute Power Rangers.
Yeah, Power Rangers
Wonder
Unite.
Twin Powers Unite. Yeah.
Our two websites will do good for the world.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
George Smart was talking with the author of American Utopia, Gabrielle Esperdy. And now a moment of reflection from Nietzsche.
Beauty, love, durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nietzsche, 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 Nietzsche. Say it with me. Nietzsche. Advanced engineering. Nietzsche, Nietzsche. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nietzsche.com/US Modernist. Nietzsche, Nietzsche, Nietzsche. That's NIETSCHE. 'Cause C H I H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichia.
Our closing guest for this year's Modernism Week series is Takashi Yanai, partner at Ehrlich Yanai Re Cheney Architects, leading the firm's San Francisco studio. Prior to this, he was a design journalist and editor at GA Houses in Tokyo. You've probably not heard of this amazing publication. Of course, it's not going to be a $20 a year subscription, let's just say, but if your project gets featured in GA Houses, it's kind of like winning an Oscar, worldwide acclaim. Today, Takashi's work continues the California modernist tradition, adding fascinating Japanese elements to brilliantly designed houses for which he is renowned. He's chair of the National AIA Committee on Design for 2021, and he's widely followed on Instagram at @T_Yanai, and that's YANAI. We join Takashi and George Smart poolside as the sun sets on another year of the U.S. Modernist compound in Palm Springs.
Now, you're doing a talk on California modernism for Modernism Week.
Yep.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's our take on California modernism. So, we do modern houses. That's what I do. Like, that's what I love doing, is designing houses. And we are steeped in tradition. Like, we love to look at, because, you don't necessarily invent out of the blue. You kind of look at
You look at precedent, borrow from things, get inspired, all of that.
Yeah. And not only that, so somewhat like you, I was, before I was an architect, I was a journalist.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have maybe more than most architects, but I think most architects do have an appreciation of what came before. But I have like a deeper appreciation maybe than most. And so our talk is a little bit about our work, of course, but it's also about where it comes from.
Okay.
So we touch on, a little bit of mid-century modern, but also like deeper roots, like who were the early modernists looking at? So
Who were the early modernists looking at?
I think it depends on the modernist.
Yeah.
But
Was it the German side or
well,
the
like
Frank?
the German side may have been looking at, who knows, like North Africa or African art or villages or some sort of vernacular sort of inspiration they stumbled upon on their travels. The West Coast side, at least some of them, were looking to Japan, for instance. So that's some of what I bring to the table as like a design nerd. Like, if I take my architect hat off for a second, I just become a fan.
Yes.
I kind of look at like those conversations that maybe like Neutra or Frank Lloyd Wright or Schindler, maybe these are just conversations in their head we're having between like their architecture and Japanese architecture. And I would like to think that it's really there. And I think that it is. Like Frank Lloyd Wright was, bouncing back and forth between LA and Tokyo.
Right.
And he's coming back and he's got these young guys working for him, like Schindler's working for him. And he's telling Rudolf Schindler, like, oh my God, I saw this amazing thing in Japan, and describing it, maybe sketching it and drawing it, because architects back then could do that.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah. And then Schindler goes off on his own and designs the King's Road house for himself, and you go to it and it looks like a Japanese house.
It does, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely.
That's one of the big surprises of going there.
Yeah, they're sliding screens, and there's connection to beautiful manicured gardens, low ceilings, right? Flowing space. It's clearly influenced by Japanese architecture. Yet he had never been there. He had never gone to Japan. So someone should do a deep dive and really like see if there's like evidence of this. But my guess would be that he's having these conversations like after work or during work with Frank Lloyd Wright and learning about Japanese architecture and becoming like interested in exploring some of these ideas for himself.
Well, your firm has been known for a long time of making some really astonishing houses.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a super fan of that. So I wanted to ask you, let's say that you have a client that wants to come in and talk about having a house designed and built. So what makes for a good client, besides budget, of course? What makes for a client that is really great to work with?
Several things. One is a willingness to be frank and open and really let us know them. So, for instance, like to me, a house is, in a funny way, a portrait.
Okay.
Not in a funny way at all. It is a portrait.
It is a portrait of
client.
the owners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't love working with some famous clients or very entitled clients have representatives.
Yes.
And so those are layers in between you and the client. And of course, that wouldn't preclude us from working with them, but it is a barrier. So we like to get to know the clients as well as we can.
As people.
Hang out, sit poolside, and have a coffee or have a drink and talk about things other than architecture for a moment, just so we get a sense of what makes them tick. What are their interests? What do they gravitate toward? It might not even be in the conversation. It might be that I see that while you're talking, you're always looking at the sky, or you're in love with plants. Like I notice that you're always looking at plants and admiring them. And they may not even be aware of it, but it gives us a little bit of a psychological profile, a little insight into what makes them tick. So that sense of willingness to spend time with us is really important. That's one of the number one ingredients. And sometimes, you take on a client and you think that they're going to give you that, and they just don't have the time to do that. No fault of their own. Sometimes they're just busy people. Like successful people are often really busy. It makes for maybe not as good a house as they could have had. If they had some time.
Because you're creating a kind of intimacy there.
Right.
That is going to manifest itself in a building one day.
Yes, that's right.
And that does take some time.
Yeah, even the design process, some people, they ask the question when they're interviewing us, like, how long does this take? And even the way they ask it, you can tell they're sort of in a hurry.
Yeah.
And that's probably not the right client for us.
Right.
Because, it's like having a kid, right? Like if design, while we're designing, is the pregnancy, you don't want the kid to come out too early.
Right.
Right?
You want the normal gestation period,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Because you're uncovering things during that design process, and there's some iterations of it.
That's right.
I get calls all the time from people asking me how to pick an architect. And what I tell them is that generally their real problem is how to pick a builder, because a lot of architects will do great jobs for them, but any number of builders will do a terrible job designing a modernist house. That might not be true out here in California where it's so prevalent.
Right.
But in North Carolina, it certainly is, and a lot of other areas. The builders this isn't in their wheelhouse.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, the builder is very important.
Do you find that you end up working with some of the same builders over and over?
We do. Especially if it's in LA. So there maybe a handful, maybe 4 or 5 builders, and we're very aware of their capabilities and their styles. So, you mentioned budget before. There's the modest budget and there's the more exuberant budget, say. So we try to align the clients, with like the builder that's going to be good at building to their budget. And then B, it's again, a home is so personal.
Yeah.
A builder that I think, or we think they're going to get along with, because they're going to be working very closely with them for a couple of years, right? So you don't want a clash of personalities or people who don't respect each other, put in that situation. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And working with a familiar group means that you're less likely to have arguments with each other.
Yeah. Like they know what we expect, and, like not every detail may be in the drawings, but they kind of know.
And you know what their capabilities are, too.
Exactly. We know, hey, this is not up to what I know you are capable of, or, hey, let's try this for the new, there's a certain comfort level there. Yeah.
So without being a formal design build firm, you're kind of being one in that sense.
Definitely. Yeah.
That must be great for the clients.
It is. And, nothing against design build, but there's something to be said about being separate entities and being able to keep each other sort of accountable, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there's no conflict of interest really there.
Now, other than your firm, of course,
Mm-hmm.
who are some of today's architects that really love their houses?
That's a good question. Well, in LA, I think Johnson, Markley,
Okay.
I think they're really, they're sort of expanding beyond houses now. Like they're doing museums and, they're on like this launching pad right now.
Okay.
But their houses are really remarkable. In LA, especially in California, you do have this sort of mid-century modern legacy vocabulary that maybe is a little overused.
Right.
It's easy to fall back upon because it's a great language, right?
Right.
And if you're fluent in it, why not? But
Like French.
yeah. But the flip side is that it might hinder creativity. So there are only a handful of architects that really have their own voice or are confident in their own voice.
Like, for instance?
Well, so like Johnson
Markley is one.
Johnson
Okay.
Markley. I mean, if you were to go back sort of old school, not old school, but, around like Koning Eisenberg, their early houses, I really love theirs because
Okay.
you really see their personality coming through. But they don't do that many houses anymore. Jim Jennings, so he just won the Mabeck Award, which is sort of like the highest award you can win in California.
Okay.
Like a gentleman architect, his office has never been more than, I don't know, maybe 4 or 6 people. He has a couple great houses out here in the desert that he's done.
Okay.
One that he did for himself that he no longer owns. But he's one of my mentors, and I don't have many, but he's someone I deeply admire, actually. Like, he's not like a crowds kind of person. But,
Okay.
But he actually grew up not too far in Riverside. So he's in San Francisco. He's a quintessential San Francisco architect now, or Bay Area architect, but he actually has his roots out in the desert. So
Now, in LA currently, there's this big controversy about the museum and the Peter Zumthor plan to take it apart. Are architects rallying around that, or are they
I think
taking sides? It seems like it's a big deal in LA right now.
Yeah. There are camps, but I'm, you know what? I'm a glass half full person.
Okay.
And Zumthor is one of my favorite architects. Like if we're to take the conversation global. So, I think they are budget constrained. They're going to be those issues, but I'm all for it. Like I think you got to go big, and hopefully some donors come through and they're able to achieve his vision
And step up.
Yeah, and step up. The Mayor Garcetti is an acquaintance of mine, and he's very bullish on it.
Yeah.
And he understands architecture, and I think you have to be. You can't. I don't know. I don't understand being a naysayer in the design world. Like that doesn't help.
Well, I have had the privilege of visiting Zumthor's spa in Val, Switzerland.
Yes.
Have you ever been there?
I have not. No.
It is really otherworldly to experience it. The hotel next door is sort of, it's a hotel.
Right.
But then you walk into this gray slate chamber, and it's like you're descending into some spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all these water experiences that you can go through. It's really one of the most unique, magical buildings I had ever been in. And the fact that you're swimming around in part of it just made it even that more special.
Yeah.
So I hope that, if this comes to pass, that Zumthor brings some of that magic to the museum in LA.
That's the hope.
That is the hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Just, what's $1 billion or $2 billion between friends? Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Spanning over Wilshire Boulevard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah.
And I wish you well in your talk.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh my God, I can't handle it.
Pull yourself together, George. That was George Smart with Takashi Yanai. Thanks for listening. Want to hang out with us at the swanky U.S. Modernist compound at Modernism Week next year, February 2021? Email george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nichiha.com/US Modernist and by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist Houses, 919-995-0550. All right, take us out, George.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,500 significant modernist houses across America, and access 3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studio in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was recorded by me and Robinson Earl. Carrie Cesarino researches guests while juggling 2 children, a bowling ball, and a flamethrower, while doing the lambada with husband Adam. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm George Smart, and we'll be back soon with another edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.